In the dead of night, Clarence House staff were seen making frantic calls. The press remained unaware, but behind gilded palace walls, an urgent crisis was unfolding. Prince Edward had collapsed during a confidential meeting in the Lancaster Suite. His sudden hospitalization sent tremors through the royal family, triggering a wave of hush orders, sealed directives, and one unexpected elevation. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, was summoned into a role far greater than she ever anticipated. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The corridors of royal power, usually so meticulously choreographed, descended into calculated chaos. Medical teams arrived at the palace not in ambulances, but in unmarked cars escorted through the east gates and directed to the private wing. No public statement was released. Communications officers were ordered into silence. Clarence House went dark. Prince Edward, the palace's quiet strategist and steward of Project Clarion's advisory wing, had suddenly become its most vulnerable guardian. And in that void, an old contingency plan began to stir, one marked by a name whispered in royal circles only during rehearsals of a crisis no one believed would ever come to pass. Sophie had just returned from a low-profile charity event when a discreet envelope was placed in her hand by a member of the Royal Intelligence Liaison, a document sealed in deep red wax, stamped with the phrase, R.A. Envelope. Clarion Support Mobilization. The moment she saw it, the room began to spin. She had read about this protocol once, long ago, during a private meeting with the late Queen, but she never thought it would be activated, certainly not under these circumstances, certainly not now. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside, there was no preamble, no comfort, no time for questions, only instructions. Meanwhile, Lady Alexandra, the rarely seen custodian of several royal protocols, appeared at Kensington in the early hours. She did not go through the front. Instead, she entered through the side vestibule used only during wartime simulations and royal succession rehearsals. Catherine met her with urgency in her eyes. There was no embrace, no formality, just a firm exchange of directives. The Duchess of Cambridge had already sensed that something far beyond a medical emergency was in motion. Within an hour, she was inside the Clarion War Room. William, who had been due to leave for a diplomatic forum in Geneva, cancelled all plans and ordered an immediate internal security lockdown. Charles, with a face set in grief yet unreadable, summoned a chamber of his most trusted aides and gave a quiet but firm instruction. This does not leave this room. Outside, the public remained unaware. The airwaves remained calm. But within the heart of the institution, power had begun to shift. Edward's absence didn't just create an emotional vacuum, it exposed operational fragilities within Project Clarion, the secret architectural strategy meant to modernize and safeguard the crown against both internal fracture and external forces. The triad system Edward had spent years reinforcing was suddenly down one pillar. Without him, protocols designed for succession, clarity, regional governance, and military advisement were in disarray. And yet, no panic was shown. Instead, in whispered tones and sealed rooms, decisions were made that would begin a new chapter of royal recalibration, one in which Sophie, whose public image had been one of elegant restraint, would rise not as a substitute, but as a sovereign force. But as the palace prepared for Edward's uncertain prognosis, it wasn't grief that consumed Sophie. It was an ancient burden, recently reawakened. The sealed parchment had not been touched since Queen Elizabeth's passing. Marked with a sapphire insignia, it contained a single line. "If Edward falters, the shadow shall rise beside the crown." Sophie, stunned, realized she was being initiated into a hidden role created decades earlier, a contingency title long erased from public archives but protected in secret, Matriarch Shadow. Its existence had always been whispered faint murmurs among the oldest aides and scribes, a forgotten construct of the Queen's post-war resilience, buried beneath layers of official silence. But Sophie had never expected to be the one written into it. The parchment was hand-penned in Elizabeth's script, its ink faded but deliberate, and the words carried the unmistakable weight of foresight. Queen Elizabeth II, in her twilight years, had crafted a contingency plan that could only be enacted if both traditional succession and strategic leadership were compromised. Prince Edward's collapse had triggered that silent alarm, and with it, Sophie was thrust into the void, no longer a supporting duchess, but a cornerstone of the monarchy's continuity. Within hours of decoding the message, Sophie was escorted to a private vault deep within the royal compound at Holyrood House. There, accompanied by only 2 witnesses and a trusted archivist, she was handed a second folder, this one labelled Matriarch Shadow, Activation Directive, Windsor Subclause B. It detailed responsibilities unseen in modern constitutional roles. She was not to lead publicly, nor to speak officially, but rather to support, advise, and protect from within. Her influence would be cloaked, her power quiet, yet essential. She was to be the axis of royal stability in moments where public roles faltered, designed not for glory, but for balance. And this directive was not hers to carry alone. In the same document, a parallel chain of coordination had already been established with Catherine. The instructions revealed a quiet system of communication between the 2 women, devised by Elizabeth herself, tested discreetly over the past decade. Their shared engagements, their mirrored patronages, their aligned appearances, none of it had been coincidental. It had been a calibration. And now, it was being activated with surgical precision. Sophie's mind flashed back to a foggy morning shortly after Prince Philip's funeral. In the Queen's private sitting room, they had spoken not of grief, but of duty. The Queen had looked Sophie in the eye and said, "In chaos, I want someone steady. Not loud. Steady." At the time, Sophie thought it was merely reflection. Now she understood it had been a quiet command. And yet with that understanding came the weight. Sophie felt it not as power, but as burden. She was no longer merely preserving tradition. She was becoming the bridge between a fading era and one still being born. The monarchy, at that moment, was not just mourning Edward's uncertain fate, it was reckoning with the question of survival. And Sophie was the answer Elizabeth had planted in the soil of her final years. What the public saw, however, was a mystery unfolding. Sophie was spotted entering the Crown Chamber alone, unusual, unannounced, and without ceremony. For the first time in years, her presence triggered speculation. Whispers emerged online. Why now? Why her? And why was Catherine seen receiving classified briefings from the same group Edward had once overseen? The answers were buried in sealed corridors, royal letters, and decrees no journalist could ever touch. But inside the institution, the torch had been passed. And while Sophie stepped into a forgotten mantle, another power was already waiting, one that had been groomed in silence and was now ready to rise with her. Catherine did not hesitate. With Prince Edward's seat in the Royal Council vacant, she activated a clause buried in Protocol Clarion, Section 9. It empowered her to act in triad with William and the Shadow Matriarch to prevent destabilization. But she would soon learn that wielding such ancient authority came at an emotional cost none of them were prepared for. There was no deliberation, no need for second opinions. The moment Edward's absence was confirmed as indefinite, Catherine reached for the deepest layer of constitutional protocol, a vault of governance known only to a select few. Appendix Windsor 4, encoded under a legacy succession file, was a sealed relic from the Queen's final decade, a system built not for traditional monarchy, but for collapse prevention. Inside it lay a strategy both simple and radical. In moments of total vulnerability, the royal family could be temporarily led not by one sovereign, but by a triad anchored in bloodline, maternal wisdom, and stabilizing strength. With William as heir, Sophie now confirmed as Shadow Matriarch, and Catherine herself holding the ceremonial and public face of the monarchy, the triad formation was triggered for the first time since Queen Victoria's emotional retreat following Prince Albert's death. But stepping into power was never meant to be peaceful. The quiet halls of Buckingham soon stirred with resistance. Camilla's private circle, still smarting from their exclusion during Edward's Clarion briefings, questioned the validity of the triad. Some argued the monarchy had no place for such deviation from tradition. They accused Catherine of engineering a coup cloaked in loyalty. One aide, long aligned with Clarence House, was overheard saying, "This is not continuity, it's conquest." Yet none of the dissenters could challenge the documents. They had been signed by Elizabeth herself, notarized, and hidden away in a vault accessed only by biometric authorization, keyed to the Queen's bloodline. The law was silent, the documents were not. Amid the storm, Catherine and Sophie did not react with publicity, they responded with devotion. Late into the night, they held vigil in St. George's Chapel, lit not by flashbulbs or ceremony, but by memory. They spoke openly of their fears, their responsibilities, their mourning, and their strength. There was no need to debate who would lead and who would support. They already knew. Catherine would take the visible fire. Sophie would bear the hidden weight. They sealed their bond not with titles, but with truth, two women prepared to defend the crown from within, regardless of who whispered against them in the shadows. For Catherine, this was never about optics. Her vision had always been something far more dangerous, rebuilding the monarchy not as a structure of men and hierarchy, but as a legacy of maternal resolve and silent steel. She saw in Sophie the calm that Elizabeth had once wielded behind closed doors. She saw in William the power to shield without spectacle. And in herself, she saw the storm that would make space for something new. But such clarity came with its own cost. Rumours began to swirl around Charles's inner circle, unease, doubt, a slow fracturing between king and heir. Charles, increasingly withdrawn, had not yet commented on Edward's role being split among others. His silence wasn't peace, it was calculation. And Clarence House, though publicly still, had begun to pulse with unrest. But while Catherine and Sophie fortified the present, secrets buried in Edward's final notes would throw the entire family into uncharted darkness. Among Edward's belongings, a black folder surfaced. Inside was a secondary annex to Protocol Clarion, marked with his initials and sealed in wax. What it contained would spark an internal review of the monarchy's deepest vulnerabilities and paint a target on Sophie and Catherine's backs. The folder, retrieved under heavy confidentiality by a member of the late Queen's Special Operations Secretariat, had never been catalogued in the formal archival registry. Its very existence contradicted royal documentation laws. And yet, there it was, deliberately hidden, fiercely protected, and undeniably real. As the seal broke and its contents were laid out before a select triad of advisors, an unsettling truth, too, emerged. This was not merely a supplement to the existing protocols. It was a warning. Titled Clarion Annex, Internal Fortification and Breach Contingencies, the document outlined systemic weaknesses across key estates, digital archives, ceremonial hierarchies, and financial pipelines. It named specific individuals as potential disruptors, with timelines dating back to 2016. At the top of one page, in Edward's precise handwriting, was a line circled in red. In the event of a bypass of triadic intent, Camilla's access must be preemptively curtailed. The implications were seismic. Edward had anticipated the very fracture Catherine and Sophie now navigated. He'd predicted a constitutional conflict that could erupt if the shadow line was activated. The document didn't accuse Camilla of malice, but it positioned her influence as inherently destabilizing should she attempt to override the triad. It was a subtle, chilling move from a man known for loyalty, and it confirmed that his recent behavior, his unusual meetings, private correspondences, and sudden seclusions were not health-related anomalies. They were deliberate, desperate preparations for an institutional reckoning he knew was coming. Sophie, while combing through the more encrypted pages, discovered a subsection marked Legacy Support, Female Axis. The language was coded, referencing obscure historical metaphors and philosophical texts, but it was unmistakable. Edward had crafted a post-Elizabethan framework that quietly empowered the maternal line within the monarchy, not just ceremonially, but structurally. Catherine's instincts were swift. She recognized a repeated phrasing that had appeared once before in Princess Alice's wartime correspondences, when covert strategies were embedded into letters between embassies. It became clear this annex had roots far older than any had imagined. At its core, the annex described a royal countermeasure to internal council rebellion, a plan to redistribute power along bloodline, silence, and intuition factors not typically written into protocol. And then, buried in a margin scrawled beside one of the encrypted directives, a name appeared: Matriarch Soul. It wasn't listed as a title. It was a designation, a role not held by Sophie, but inherited by her without ceremony. The title had never been announced, never recorded, but it had been prepared. Edward had written it as both prophecy and protection. As the weight of the annex settled over Catherine and Sophie, the walls around them began to close. The palace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a web of watching eyes, fractured loyalties, and whispered calculations. The document could not be destroyed, but revealing it would unleash chaos. And worse still, its very existence put them in the crosshairs of anyone who viewed the Triad as a threat. The lines had been drawn, but the battlefield had no rules, only shadows. As revelations multiplied, palace loyalties fractured, and Camilla, sensing her moment slipping away, made her most aggressive move yet. Camilla struck while Edward lay unconscious. Calling an emergency trustees meeting, she sought to invalidate all protocols tied to Matriarch Shadow and override Catherine's temporary Triad powers. What followed was a bitter confrontation, one that tested Sophie's resolve and Catherine's strategic genius like never before. Summoned in haste, the Royal Household Board, dormant since the late Queen restructured its function, was reassembled at Camilla's direction. Several members, loyal from the Charles transition era, were coaxed out of quiet retirement. Their orders were precise: challenge the legitimacy of the Triad structure, question Sophie's new designation, and dissect the authority granted by Protocol Clarion. But behind the polished formalities and staged concern was a raw motive. Camilla wanted the matriarch model erased. She wanted control restored to Clarence House, and with Edward in a hospital bed and Charles increasingly absent, she saw her opening. Sophie was blindsided. Just hours after revisiting Edward's encrypted annex, she received a legal courier bearing a removal notice, authorized by Clarence House legal counsel. The document cited her overreach, claimed her involvement had no constitutional precedent, and warned of disciplinary consequences if she continued operating within the Triad model. But Sophie didn't falter. She carried the notice into the Privy Council room, where Camilla had gathered her allies under the guise of restoring institutional order. Catherine arrived moments later, composed but sharp. With barely a glance at the advisors seated around the long table, she laid a single document in front of Camilla Appendix, Windsor IV. The clause was clear. Once enacted under emergency succession, the Triad powers could not be contested for 60 days without a full vote of the Clarion Council, of which Edward, currently incapacitated, was a primary signatory. Camilla's entire legal basis crumbled in seconds. The tension in the room turned from authoritative to personal, and then came the rupture. In a moment that shocked even the most senior officials, Sophie broke protocol and spoke. For years, she had been the quiet constant, the one who followed, supported, waited. But that day, her voice rang with steel. She spoke not just as Edward's wife, but as a keeper of the Queen's silent instruction. She invoked the shadow directives, spoke of private ceremonies, and named the hidden design Elizabeth had set in motion. Her words were not loud, but they were final. They echoed off the ancient stone and silenced every advisor who dared to challenge her right to stand where she stood. Camilla, rattled but unwilling to show defeat, turned to Princess Anne for support. But Anne, known for loyalty to the crown over personal favor, stood without hesitation. She addressed the room plainly. The Queen trusted them. That is all that matters now. And with that, the tide turned. Camilla, seething behind a measured expression, collected her documents and exited in silence. But her retreat was not surrender. Within the hour, she placed a call to a private press advisor, one known for discreetly leaking internal shifts to the tabloids without leaving fingerprints. The battle had paused. The war was not over. With Camilla momentarily sidelined, the road cleared for a deeper revelation, one that would bind Sophie and Catherine not just by duty, but by ancestral design. Hidden in the Queen's private diaries, discovered only after Edward's hospitalization, lay a breathtaking revelation. Elizabeth had once written, "They must walk together, as I walked with my sister." Sophie and Catherine, it seemed, were not chosen by accident. They were selected, across generations, to be guardians of the monarchy's soul. The pages were delicate, bound in leather, and kept in a compartment only accessible through dual authorization, one belonging to the Lord Chamberlain, the other embedded in Edward's biometric keyring. Inside those pages, Elizabeth had written not about political power, but about emotional continuity. She observed Sophie and Catherine for years, not merely through public service, but in quiet moments. How they responded to failure, how they handled betrayal, how they protected those they loved. The Queen, a monarch who had lived through upheaval, had come to believe that the future of the crown would not be preserved by force or tradition, but by empathy, intellect, and the fusion of two distinct but complementary spirits. She saw that in them. She had once written, "Margaret was my other half," but she could not carry the silence. Sophie can. Catherine will. It was a reflection of her own life with Princess Margaret, a bond defined by contrast, affection, and the balance between duty and defiance. In Catherine and Sophie, Elizabeth saw a mirrored potential. One led with vision and fire, the other with presence and patience. The Queen had left behind letters, some handwritten, others dictated, expressing her secret hope that one day a dual force would steady the monarchy from within, unseen by the world but unshakable in effect. In one particularly emotional entry, dated only months before her passing, she wrote, "They are not a succession, they are a constellation." The revelation went deeper still. In a review of old Balmoral travel logs, a pattern emerged. Sophie's private visit to the estate in 2004, long thought to be for personal recovery, was in fact a testing ground. The Queen had orchestrated a simulated crisis meeting involving regional estate management and ceremonial directors. Sophie was briefed, debriefed, and then quietly evaluated by Elizabeth herself. The result was never made public, but a note in the diary confirmed it. She kept her silence, even when pressured. That is the mark. Catherine, too, had been groomed more intimately than anyone had known. Her solo engagements in 2016, including obscure Commonwealth events and untelevised internal briefings, had contained embedded readiness drills. She had been quietly introduced to fragments of Protocol Clarion without knowing the full scope. It was a masterstroke of succession, planning layered, precise, and hidden in plain sight. Then came the velvet pouch. Delivered to Sophie on the morning after Elizabeth's funeral, it contained only a single slip of linen paper. It bore no signature, no seal, just a line, written in the Queen's unmistakable hand. "One will rise, the other will hold." It was not instruction, it was prophecy. And now, the prophecy was unfolding slowly, painfully, inevitably. But before they could fulfill this haunting legacy, the nation would awaken to Edward's condition, and the monarchy's veiled transition already in motion. The palace gates trembled under the weight of headlines. Prince Edward critical. Catherine takes control. Sophie replacing Charles. Rumours ignited global speculation, and for the first time in decades, Buckingham Palace was forced to issue a live broadcast addressing the kingdom. It began as a trickle. Anonymous insiders speaking to columnists, whispers among staff leaked to royal commentators. But by morning, it was a storm. The press, long kept at bay by carefully choreographed appearances, now had more questions than answers, and none of them could be silenced. Images of Catherine arriving at a sealed royal council meeting circulated with breathless captions. Footage of Sophie exiting the Clarion Council chamber alone was leaked to the BBC, then replayed across every screen in Britain. Within hours, number Shadow Crown and number Duchess Dominion were trending worldwide. The public, starved for clarity, began to draw their own conclusions. Some framed it as a quiet coup, others saw it as long overdue justice. But all agreed on one thing: Something seismic was happening inside the monarchy. The palace had no choice but to respond. The official statement, while measured, confirmed what many feared. Prince Edward remained in critical but stable condition. His duties had been temporarily reassigned, in accordance with emergency provisions outlined in legacy sovereign protocols. But it was the subtext that ignited the blaze. There was no mention of Charles, no affirmation of Camilla's standing. And instead, for the first time in royal history, the joint leadership of two duchesses was acknowledged without caveat. Catherine, stepping forward under the burden of generational expectation, delivered a rare address, solemn, poised, and deliberate. Her voice trembled only once, when referencing Edward's lifelong service. She did not speak of power. She spoke of duty. She did not highlight her authority. She invoked unity. "This is not a time for divisions. It is a time for guardianship," she said, her eyes fixed not just on Britain, but on the very soul of the commoned monarchy. She made no threats. She offered no timeline. But the world heard what they needed. The crown was not broken, it was transforming. And then came the silence. Camilla's silence. Not one appearance, not one photo, not even a quote through a palace aide. Her absence screamed louder than any speech. Online theories spiraled out of control. Was she resisting the shift? Had she been sidelined? Was she quietly negotiating her exit? Analysts speculated endlessly, but one fact was irrefutable. Camilla had been erased from the narrative at the exact moment Catherine and Sophie were rising in tandem. The public, watching history unfold in real time, responded in kind. Polling surged in favor of what tabloids dubbed the dual duchess rule. Petitions flooded Parliament's advisory offices, calling for constitutional acknowledgement of matriarch shadow. Op-eds from former royal advisors declared it a modern miracle, others condemned it as reckless. But the people had spoken, and the palace, for once, was no longer ahead of the story. It was running to catch up. But as the monarchy's public image spiraled, the Queen's final ceremonial act, locked away since 2022, was reactivated, bringing the greatest shock yet. Queen Elizabeth had signed only 4 personal decrees in her final year. One of them, the Crown Stabilisation Decree, was sealed and hidden in the royal archives. It could only be activated if the monarchy faced leadership disarray, and when it was opened, it named Catherine and Sophie as the only authorised stewards of the Crown's moral legacy. The decision to unseal it was not taken lightly. It required the presence of no fewer than 5 hereditary signatories, including 1 royal bloodline holder, 2 council heads, and a ceremonial witness. The moment came in the Crown Chamber, where the Duke of Kent stood before the sealed scroll and invoked a passage rarely uttered outside war. The crown endures through clarity, not confusion. As the wax broke, the words within carried the unmistakable weight of final intent. Elizabeth had left no ambiguity. Catherine and Sophie were to lead not ceremonially, not symbolically, but structurally, should the throne find itself unmoored between bloodline and governance. The timing was precise. The purpose was now. The decree's clauses outlined roles so specific they seemed surgical. Catherine was to assume the title Royal Heir Guide, a role designed to shepherd transition, safeguard heirs, and serve as the monarchy's visible hand in times of fracture. Sophie was named Matriarch Soul, the quiet engine of preservation, meant to protect traditions and stabilize inner circles. Together, they were charged with executing continuity rituals, ancient ceremonies rooted in Tudor and Victorian protocols, designed to realign the monarchy's moral compass without disrupting the constitutional structure. That night, in the Windsor crypt beneath St. George's Chapel, a private ceremony unfolded. No cameras, no public notice, only a handful of senior royals, clergy, and trusted advisors bore witness as the final ceremonial authority of the late Queen was invoked. A candle was lit using the flame first kindled at Elizabeth's coronation. A chalice, once used in Queen Mary's restoration, was passed between Sophie and Catherine. It was not a coronation. It was something deeper, a spiritual transfer of guardianship. They were no longer preparing to lead. They had been summoned to protect. The moment of culmination arrived when the vault housing Legacy Clarion, a chamber of royal artifacts, sealed since the Queen's death, was opened, and Sophie was handed the key. Not a symbolic token, but the actual authority to access centuries of codified tradition. Her hands shook as she turned the lock. Inside were scrolls, tiaras, pins, handwritten instructions, and recordings that would now be under her care. These were not objects, they were anchors, and with them, the crown found its compass again. William, watching from a distance, approached afterward with eyes full of pride and pain. He placed a hand on each woman's shoulder and said only one word: "Endure." He did not speak of power or succession, but in a voice low and grave, he offered a warning. The public was shifting, the palace was divided, and forces not bound by tradition were already moving. For now, the triad held. But what lay ahead would test more than duty. It would test destiny. But just as stability appeared within reach, a whisper emerged from St. James's Palace. Edward had awakened, and his first words would change everything. After weeks in silence, Edward finally stirred. Surrounded by William, Anne, and Catherine, he whispered a single phrase that sent chills through the room: "Don't trust the arch." The rest was lost to his failing breath. And with that, a new mystery emerged, one that could threaten everything Sophie and Catherine had built. The moment was almost sacred. Edward, who had been suspended between life and memory, suddenly opened his eyes, locked onto Catherine's, and uttered the warning that now echoed through every corridor of royal power. The doctors leaned in, but his breath faded, and within minutes he had slipped back into unconsciousness. No one moved. Not William. Not Anne. Not even Catherine, who, for all her strength in recent weeks, looked as though she had just been struck in the chest. Don't trust the arch. The phrase was a cipher with no key, and the implications rippled through the palace like a storm front. Back at the palace, theories erupted. Who or what was the arch? Was it a person, a title, a location? Some believed it was code for the Archbishop of Canterbury, a figure known to quietly wield influence behind the spiritual curtain of monarchy. Others speculated it referred to a secret council within the Church of England, or worse, a hidden faction within the Crown's ecclesiastical arm that operated beyond public knowledge. The message was brief, but it was enough to trigger a covert investigation within the triad's inner circle. Camilla's movements added fuel to the fire. Within 48 hours of Edward's brief awakening, she was seen arriving without media announcement at Lambeth Palace, the official residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The meeting was private, unscheduled, and lasted well over an hour. No statement was issued, but word leaked. Tensions reignited. Whispers turned to questions. Was Camilla working to reassert religious authority, to counterbalance the triad's growing institutional grip? Or was this something more personal, more calculated? Sophie, always the quiet sentinel, took the lead. She ordered an internal review of past correspondences between the Crown and Church, specifically from 1997 and 2011. Those were not random years. They marked moments of internal division, the aftermath of Diana's death, and the redefinition of succession laws. Both moments saw deep rifts between tradition and reform, and both involved sensitive files that had never been fully released. Sophie requested access to clerical dispatches sealed under sovereign vicar privilege, a classification known to just a handful of royal archivists. What she hoped to find, she wouldn't say. But her instincts were not driven by curiosity. They were driven by something darker. A red-sealed document arrived at Kensington Palace's private courier entrance bearing no sender's name, no return address. It carried only a royal cipher, long retired, and a crimson wax emblem embossed with a cross within a crown. Catherine held it in her hands as Sophie entered the room. Neither spoke, neither blinked. They knew what this meant. The past wasn't done speaking, it had only just begun. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.